Hello, everyone. Dr. Yonit Arthur here. You are on the Steady Coach, and welcome back for another success story. My absolute favorite thing to share with all of you. This success story comes to you from Stephen, who was ultimately diagnosed with 3PD or PPPD, but who had a whole range of chronic dizziness symptoms, including trampoline walking, visual disturbances, light sensitivity, rocking, difficulty sleeping, and a whole lot more that he will go into more detail about during our conversation. One thing that I want to highlight about Stephen's story that I think you'll find interesting, among many other things you'll find interesting in this conversation, is that his symptoms started in a little bit of an unusual way. And Stephen wondered at times if he was an outlier when he found my channel and if maybe the things that I was talking about didn't apply to him. Stephen originally started having symptoms after having a very serious medical diagnosis that turned out to be totally a false positive. So he doesn't have that medical condition. But the stress of that diagnosis led to a panic attack, and the dizziness symptoms immediately started after the panic attack, and they just became chronic as he got stuck in a cycle of health anxiety and fear. Now, I actually reassured him in this conversation that this presentation of chronic dizziness, or this way of starting to have chronic dizziness, is actually quite common. So if you're out there and you never had a medical condition that actually explains why your symptoms started, and they just kind of started out of the blue with a lot of anxiety and a panic attack, you're really going to get a lot of benefit out of hearing Stephen's story because he is just like you. He gives a lot of actionable advice in this conversation, including going into a lot of detail about the traps he felt that he fell into as he was trying to recover. He very eloquently describes the ups and downs of recovery too. So I think you're going to get a ton out of this conversation. I'm looking forward to reading your questions and comments. If you're here on YouTube, please be sure to leave one. Let me know that you like success stories so I keep recording them. You can also like, share, and subscribe to my channel. This helps me reach more people. If you're listening to this as a podcast, please consider following the podcast, leaving a 5-star rating. This also helps me reach more people. Please enjoy this conversation with Stephen. Stephen, welcome. Thank you so much for agreeing to share your story today.
Hi, good to see you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's always my privilege. These are just my favorite pieces of content to record. I almost feel like calling them content doesn't fully encapsulate how awesome they are and how important they are to me. But I was wondering if, before we jump into you sharing the story of chronic dizziness recovery, you could just give some context about who you are.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Stephen. I am 44 years old. I'm an entrepreneur. My wife and I run several businesses. I'm in Australia. You and I are talking at very odd times. Time zones.
Yes, we are. I appreciate that.
So I've got my coffee here to wake up the brain, and
I'm ready to go to bed. Perfect.
And excellent, yeah, exactly. And so I'm about a year into this job. Actually, it's almost exactly 10 months since this journey, let's call it that, began, and you have been instrumental in helping me get over it. So we talk about all of that, the ups and downs, and how we ended up here.
Yeah. That's why I'm here. And I'm just so excited because this is actually, although you were a part of my coaching group, because of the time zone difference you just described, we haven't been able to connect in person. So this is our first time actually seeing each other on video, and it's so cool. I'm really excited to hear the story.
Yeah, exactly. And I submitted a few questions to you over the months. So it's been very much a one-way kind of thing. And even that's been very helpful, just to be able to access you through that kind of modality. But yeah, if you're open to waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm sure there are some people in Australia who would love some coaching from you.
I know. Yeah. Well, I'll think about that. But Stephen, you say this, but this is why Pippa is so wonderful, because she's in the UK. So she does her coaching in the morning UK time. So it's evening Australia time. So it's doable for people. It's doable.
It is doable. Yes, exactly. You just, for sure.
Yeah.
Everything is doable.
Yes.
Yes.
You're already giving me a hard time, Stephen. Off air, he was already giving me a hard time about not coming to Australia. He was saying all sorts of things about not wanting to travel, and I needed to face my fears. So before we turn this into a coaching session on me, Stephen, tell us how the symptoms got started. Like, give us the context and give us a description of what happened.
Yeah, look, it's good to be lighthearted about this whole thing now. I'm glad we can joke, but this year hasn't been very lighthearted. So how the thing started was through a traumatic medical event. I'm not your typical client, as far as I can tell, in a sense that I'm not the type of person who really needs to do a lot of work on establishing boundaries, etc. I'm not that personality profile. My journey began when I went for a routine checkup with a cardiologist, and the set of results that came back that painted a picture that could have been really unsavory. It basically was one of those, oh, this could be really serious, and kind of scenarios. And 2 weeks after that diagnosis, as we were waiting for more tests to show up to confirm or to rule things out, I had a panic attack. I've never had a panic attack before. I didn't know what to expect. And so I thought when I was having it that this was the diagnosis coming to fruition. And so I thought I was dying, basically. And I remember in that moment, as we were waiting for the ambulance to arrive, I was thinking, God damn it, I'm the kind of person who is much more likely to ignore symptoms, ironically enough, and to overlook something. And I remember thinking, now you've done it. Like you tend to ignore things when they show up, and you obviously missed this one. And if I survive this this thing, I'm definitely going to be much more diligent with how I treat my health. So I think all of that sparked this massive health anxiety that then basically snowballed. And of course, in hindsight, I do remember during that event being dizzy. I remember walking around, sort of pacing, and being lightheaded. So, cut a long story short, basically that diagnosis was false positive. They told me my heart is perfectly fine, and a few days after that, I had my first episode of being a bit funny on my feet. I still at the time thought maybe they missed something, so I thought maybe it felt like low blood pressure, maybe low blood sugar, something like that. It's hard to explain what that feels like to when you first start having it, and then also to practitioners who don't know what you're talking about. And so I remember being quite fuzzy and struggling to explain what I was experiencing. I was saying things like, my joints don't quite feel right. It's like I'm a bit off balance, but I'm actually perfectly balanced. And yet something doesn't feel right. My head feels funny. Anyway, so obviously the rest of the picture unfolded how it typically does. The symptoms became much less intermittent and more severe. New things showed up, and then that's when I started on this journey, and eventually found you and all the rest of it.
Okay. I just want to say, if I may, I'm so glad that you started explaining this by talking about how you weren't the typical person, because you're right. There is kind of a profile, and about 80% of people, I would say, kind of fit or meet those criteria when they view my channel, but 20% don't. And I have seen people go through a lot of people have gone through experiences like yours where they don't have like a clear like dizziness related medical event. They have a totally separate medical event. I have recently spoken to someone who had a reaction to a medical procedure. It was just a routine medical procedure that wasn't supposed to be a big deal. And he had a reaction to it that then led to, just like you described, a panic attack even a few days later, because he was under so much stress from feeling the effects of this medical procedure. That's one. I've seen people have a totally unrelated illness that clearly did not cause an ear problem, but led to your nervous system just being completely, I don't know how else to put it, just in a total state of panic and hypervigilance that just, again, leads to just overload and then panic attack and symptoms. So I just thank you for saying that. I think you just made those 20% who don't fit the profile feel welcome and be like, oh, okay, I'm listening. Maybe even, even though I don't have a vestibular origin to my symptoms, maybe I do belong here. So thank you for that.
Yeah,
I appreciate
exactly.
that.
And that was part of my struggle as well, because as I began to research and find your content, I remember that was one of my doubts. I remember thinking, because obviously doubt is a huge part of this journey, and being able to override it and actually believe that you're fine is huge. And I remember that being always a bit of a niggling thing. I remember going, that was always the escape hatch for my brain when in the worst moments. It was like, actually, no, there is something wrong with you because you don't fit that profile. And so yeah, it's well, in my case, it was very much the other 20%
Yes.
that I belong in.
Yes. Again, really appreciate you. There are a lot of people out there who are feeling relief hearing this right now. So before we go into what the medical process was like, maybe you want to say a word about the symptoms themselves. So kind of as things started getting worse, what were you experiencing on a day-to-day basis?
It started off as what you would call trampoline walking, and that's been the consistent theme throughout. And at its worst, when this trampoline walking thing was, triggered by, eventually I figured out what the triggers were, and obviously they were amplified by stress and all the rest of it. At its worst, it felt like, again, see, it's like I struggle to describe it, but it's like every joint in your body is kind of sending you a slightly wrong signal. Like my hips felt weird, my ankles felt weird, my toes, my eyes would have trouble making sense of what's going on. And, again, and it's something that I'm a bit of an outlier. Having read a lot of the stories on your forums, I feel lucky because I feel that there are people who've had and have symptoms that are far worse than what I had. And so I feel a lot of sympathy and empathy for them, because it's, mine were relatively moderate, and yet the year has been extremely stressful. So I cannot imagine what it's like to be digging yourself out of the much more severe kind of holes.
And yet, and yet, you went through a life-changing and very, very difficult time. So for you, it sounds like you were.
Am I invalidating my experience?
You are invalidating your experience. Dang it! Don't invalidate your experience. Yeah. So we're spending this whole conversation coaching each other. That's what this interview actually is.
Awesome.
But I just I again just keep in mind, even if certainly we can acknowledge all the people who are having like a really, really difficult time, some of them stuck in bed or what have you, just really, I think in some ways being somewhat functional is sometimes even harder for people, because then they feel pressure. So if your symptoms are so bad that you can't even get out of bed, like it's just full stop, like you can't do anything. So you not to say it's not miserable and terrible in its own way, but there's no working, there's no walking around, there's no trying to like act normal. You can't, you just can't. You're just so stuck. Whereas the folks who have the symptoms kind of more moderately, often you're faced with these really difficult decisions. Like, what do I do with my work? How do I do I just push through? Like, it doesn't force people to stop. And I find that actually can make things harder in some ways. Again, different types of hard. That's all really terrible and hard. But I'm just saying, I've worked with a lot of people who've had symptoms that are more moderate, and it's still just such a struggle. So just, I see you, and I want other people to know I see them too.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And one of the big struggles was trying to figure out on the right course of action. And this is one of the things I want to talk about, because one of the reasons why I wanted to chat with you is because I think you're filling a massive gap that really should be filled by the mainstream medical system, right?
Agreed.
So if you look at my journey, it's sort of been like this kind of like a reverse bell curve, right? It started off as these light intermittent symptoms, which I didn't know what to make of. At first, I was quite ambivalent about them. I wasn't too panicked about them. I thought maybe they're going to go away, but eventually they didn't. So of course I got more worried and basically just spiraled myself into this depth. I found you basically at the bottom of that, and then I kind of exited on the other side. But this whole journey, like I mentioned earlier, is almost now a year. If this was available at the very beginning, the first
Absolutely.
doctor I went, do you know what I mean? Like, this is something that needs to be available to people in the mainstream, so that when somebody like me or one of your other clients goes to see we call them GPs, general practitioners. I think you call them primary care providers. Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
basically
Nice. Picking up the American lingo. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So my question is, why is this not? It could be available to everyone. And had that person that I went to see said, "Hey, listen, this is nothing to worry about. Just chill. This is what you need to do, and it will be fine."
And we see this sometimes, and it's a normal reaction of your nervous system when you've had a panic.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this journey could have taken 1 month instead of 10 plus, right? So
yes.
So I really hope that that you manage to expand your reach, and perhaps not even just to end users like me, but also to actual GPs, so that you can educate them, because there's a huge need for this, right? I view this as I have a mixed bag of emotions about this now on the other side, because I'm extremely grateful that it feels like I'm at the end of this, but I'm also, not angry, but just, there's been a huge loss this year, right? A huge financial loss, a huge emotional loss for myself, my wife. So I feel like this is something that the system has failed somewhere. And again, my version of this is quite moderate. How many people are, like you said, are in bed,
years,
unable to move for years, and so there is such a loss there that I think doesn't have to be there if the medical system just shapes up a little bit.
I am totally in agreement with you. That is one of my big goals. And I'm not going to derail this conversation by getting on a soapbox about it, because I could. I have lots of feelings about this, but
yes.
I do want you to know there are hopeful signs. I'm hearing from doctors and I have a few doctors I've seen as clients, actually. I think especially doctors who work with dizzy clients or dizzy patients in their cases, they really didn't get into this just to not help people. They want to help people, and they just don't necessarily have the training or tools to talk to them in the way that we do. So they're starting to refer people to the work that I do. And that's one of the reasons I've made so much of it free, because I want doctors to be able to look through it themselves, see if it makes sense to them, and then be able to send it to patients without having to worry about people having to pay. So it's huge part of my mission now is to just, as you said, I can't help everyone. It needs to be in the hands of the people who see people on day one. That's what really should happen.
Correct.
So
yes.
What did happen then? So you went through this terrible few weeks. You had this panic attack, your symptoms started, and then how did the doctors respond when you went to them? When you went back to them and said, "Hey, I'm feeling really terrible"?
Well, so there were 5 or 6, let's call them characters on this journey, right? Medical system and
Medical
related characters. Yes.
Okay.
And all of them had various levels of usefulness, ranging from completely useless to partly having part of the answers. Well, before I go there, let me just wrap up the symptoms. Just it will help contextualize the journey.
Yes, thank you.
So basically, the symptoms were this whole the funny walking business, the trampoline walking, let's call it that. It was like the boaty feeling. At its extreme, it then became something that, you see, because it all was triggered by the health anxiety, by that whole panic attack, where my mind constantly ran to is this worst case scenarios, right? Like where is it? Because again, there's no context for it available. So I was thinking, okay, well, this is not too bad, but is this as bad as it gets, or is this just the beginning, and is it progressing, right? So I was thinking, okay, so this is I can probably manage this, but then if it continues getting worse, and when it was worse, I was borderline having trouble walking. I'm thinking, where is this going to end, right? Like, where's the bottom of this? And so, am I going to be able to walk? All of these thoughts, all of these kind of slippery slopes, were about independence, about mobility, just kept on showing up, right? That would have been nice to know about if earlier, and then other things began to show up. So things like visual symptoms, lights in my eyes, this weird fuzziness in my brain when I turn my head. Ironically enough, some of the stuff that really seems scary right now didn't bother me. So, for example, the trampoline walking really did bother me. At some point, I developed this kind of almost like somebody would shut my lights off for 0.1 of a second, like literally just like a power off. And
Wow.
and in hindsight, that sounds really wild, but somehow that just didn't even faze me. I was like, eh. So it was just a mixed bag of things. Then a whole bunch of other, the symptom drift is very much real. So all kinds of peripheral neurological things like numbness in hands, fingers, feet, all of that kind of stuff began to show up towards the middle, like the worst stage. I'm sure I'm forgetting other stuff, but basically it was just a combination of this weird walking sensation, lights, and neurological stuff in my hands, which then again fed into this whole health anxiety. I was like, what does all this mean? Do I have some kind of a degenerative neurological disease? And so anyway, it just was like a loop basically that I was in. So I went about trying to untangle all of this using the medical system. My first port of call was to see obviously a GP. Mm-hmm. She look, in her defense, she basically said, look, the way you're presenting right now, I don't think it's anything neurological. I don't think you need to do further testing, right? So she kind of casually ruled out all the worst sort of degenerative sort of long-term things. And she basically told me to de-stress and relax, right? So she basically said, this is most likely stress. And I went to see another GP who had a similar version, although she came closer. She mentioned something to do with vestibular migraines, right? So that gave me some direction to do my own research in later. That helped. But the GPs really didn't have much more insight apart from that. That was the beginning. Do you want me to continue through
Did she have any? Yes. Well, did she have any? I mean, so that's nice. Okay, so thanks, doc. There's nothing wrong with me. So, like, what do I do? Did she have any suggestions for you?
No. No, it was literally like that. It was basically that I told her about the panic attack. I told her that at the time I was still, that loop about the heart wasn't closed yet. So I thought, so she was like, you're probably just stressed. That was the conclusion.
Okay. So, okay. I mean, what's interesting is she wasn't totally wrong.
Correct, right?
But the way that was communicated may just not have been the most effective way.
Right. So it's part of the picture, right? But not the full picture. Yeah.
Right.
One thing that helped me along the way is that I have a friend who told me early that this is going to go away because he had something similar show up after a diving accident. Right. So he had a massive panic attack underwater and he was basically dizzy for 6 months. And he was like, bro, just ignore it. It will go away. Trust me. And so that was one extra data point, even though I didn't fully believe him, because again, the weight of the medical system kind of pointed, it's just a friend, right? Like he's the opposite of a doctor. So as far as his one anecdotal experience goes, I wanted to trust it and I did hold on to it as much as I could. But the bulk of the evidence, it was pulling me in different directions. So the next character on this journey, I think, was, that's right, I went to see a naturopath, thinking, again, I need to distress. So they put me on an entire supplement stack, all kinds of stress reducing stuff, which maybe worked, maybe didn't. It's hard to obviously know in hindsight because there was obviously no comparison. But at the time, I remember thinking, this is not clearly not making things go away. Who else was there? Oh, there was a physio as well. So the next port of call, maybe there's something wrong with my neck, all the rest of it. And the physio suggested what are those things called? The vestibular exercises, right? So balance and those cards with the crosses where you look left and right. So I became obsessed with those things. I was like, oh, okay, so this is the solution. If I just need to upgrade my vestibular system, no problem. I'll dial this in. So
Yep, I'm seeing it now. Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
So if there were Olympics for vestibular exercises, I probably would have been
Yes, I made a post about that a long time ago. Are you a vestibular exercise Olympian? I, no joke, heard from someone recently who joined the coaching group. She was doing like 2 hours of vestibular exercises every day.
Oh yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that was me.
Yeah. Okay. Message to everyone out there. I'm trained in vestibular therapy. I'm a huge proponent of vestibular therapy. I send people to vestibular therapy. You should not have to do hours and hours of vestibular therapy every day. And if you are, and it's not helping, then we're not using the right tool.
It's also, I think, important to shape up the context for this because, again, in the information environment I was working in was quite obviously poor, right? So the theory I was working with at the time was I'm just overstimulated, right? So overstimulated as far as my nervous system goes. I thought, okay, I had a stressful year at work before then, and then I had this panic attack. So clearly I just overtaxed my system, right? And that's what I wanted to believe, obviously, and so I kind of latched onto that. So the logical conclusion from that was, I just need to do what I can to reduce the level of autonomous stress, right? So that's what I dialed in, right? And so, of course, this is one of the traps I felt. We can talk about traps because I fell into quite a few of them along the way. And the number one trap was definitely overdoing that whole parasympathetic thing, right? Where I thought, okay,
yes.
So just to give you some context, right? How at my most at the most extreme point of that, what I was doing, well, I basically was like, okay, so I need to work a bit less, and I cut my workload to part-time. At the time we lived in a quite a noisy part of Sydney, so we thought maybe reducing the amount of just input into my brain would be good. So we stayed in a hotel a couple of times a week for a few weeks. You would go for walks on the beach. So just to give you like an idea of my parasympathetic, like in some ways, again, in hindsight, it seems pretty funny, but at the time, I had like this retirement kind of life going on where I would wake up, I would meditate for 15 minutes still in bed. Then I would do some parasympathetic breathing. Then I'd go for a walk on the beach barefoot while listening to some yogi music. I would do some breathing there. I would make sure I got the right amount of light into my eyes because that's important for sleep. I would do the supplement stack. I would, basically my day became trying to reduce, like deregulate myself, right? And so then I'd be some vestibular exercise at some point. And then again, I had timers on my phone set to make sure if I'm working, then I'm every 2 hours taking time to do some single nostril breathing or something like that. And look, all of it is important, right? The thing is, I think the trap I fell into is that I think all of that fed into this worldview that I'm broken, right? And something's wrong. And ironically enough, the key turning point was when I was just so fed up with this life and with all of this stuff I was doing that I actually just went in the opposite direction. I'll talk about that later, but it was literally like I threw it all out. I actually became a little bit self-destructive. Like I actually just went, oh, by the way, I also went gluten-free, dairy-free.
Of course. Oh, yes. Well, can't do what you just described without the diet too, the elimination diet. Yes.
So yeah,
You only eliminated gluten and dairy. I'm kind of disappointed, honestly, Stephen, with everything else you were doing. I mean, I'm surprised you didn't cut out avocados and bananas and chocolate and coffee and all these other cheeses and all these other things people blame for symptoms too.
yeah, flavonoids. You have to be really careful
Yeah.
with histamines
Yes.
and all the rest of it. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. For anyone who's not watching, we're joking. I mean, I'm not joking in like in a not like in a teasing, we're joking in a teasing way. I'm not joking in a way like you may actually be sensitive to those foods right now,
Yes.
but it's probably not a medical problem. It's probably because your nervous system thinks that those things are dangerous right now. But a lot of people end up in that trap that you just described. And Stephen, I'm so glad you just described it so beautifully, because I just put out a video on this like this last weekend about OCD and health anxiety specifically.
I saw that one.
And
Yes.
yes. And I talked about the fixing cycle. Like, so this is the trap so many people fall into. They find my stuff, they hear about somatic tracking and parasympathetic breathing, which are great tools. But then they're like, okay, it's like a fix. I just have to do it really hard. I have to like, oh, it's not working. Well, then I've got to like parasympathetic breathe all day long because my nervous system is dysregulated. And that's that as you just like you described it, it actually reinforces that there's something wrong with you. And it that constant focus on trying to fix yourself, it's exhausting, and it actually makes you fear the symptoms more, not less. So
Yeah.
that's why it doesn't work.
Yeah. Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to hear more about the traps, but hang on. I'm trying to keep us on track to physicians. So you saw the naturopath, you became extremely healthy, and what happened from there?
So the naturopath, then there was the physio. So yeah, the physio gave me more balance exercises to do, and standing on one leg. He gave me again, for my brain, it was perfect because he gave me more advanced balance exercises. And in his defense, it kind of worked for a bit, right? I remember actually in his office, he gave me this funky exercise where I would stand on one leg on a medicine ball and play table tennis against the wall with myself, right? Like really difficult. Yeah. And I remember walking out of the office going, I feel better, right? And partly, it was probably because I just felt safer in some kind of a practitioner's presence. And also maybe it would do something. So then, of course, I went straight to the local sports store, bought myself a table tennis racket.
Of course you did. Of course you did.
So I still have it. If somebody wants one, I'll put it up on eBay. And so, and so just madness.
And to be fair, that would be so effective and appropriate for someone who had like an ear injury or a concussion. Like that's actually totally appropriate. But yeah.
So anyway, so there was another bunch of exercises that I did for some time. And then at some point, I remember thinking, okay, look, enough of these like fringe sort of people. I'm going to actually seriously rule out anything serious, right? So I want to see a hardcore doctor. Enough of these, amateur GPs. So I booked in with a neurologist, like a neurologist, right? Who
nice.
There was see, I'm leveling up. So
I'm impressed now. Yes.
So there's this place. There are a few dizzy clinics around Sydney. So I went to see. Oh no, hang on. So before I go there, so at some point I figured out what triple PD was, right? Because at the time it was still there was no roadmap, right? And so I did more research, and finally came across this thing somewhere between the physio and the naturopath, that there's actually a label for this, and there's potentially a roadmap, right? Until then, I was just thinking this is just me being weird. And so then once I had the triple PD sticker, then I was like, okay, who works with triple PD people? And so I found the neurologist, and again, there was a new hope, because I'm thinking maybe this person will actually give me some magic pill that I can just take, and the whole thing goes away, and I return to normal life. So I went to see this guy, and he basically did a whole bunch of testing to rule out any other serious things. It literally felt like I was in some kind of a medieval witchery sort of. He was tapping on my head, he was hitting on my skull with various instruments. It was. So he basically
did they do the goggles tests?
Oh yeah,
Did
yeah.
they do tests with
Yeah.
goggles?
Oh,
Okay.
that's right. The wobbly thing.
And the ear, like where they put the air in your ear or the water in your ear. Did they put you on a chair and spin you around? I mean,
No.
we got some tests. No,
No.
you missed out. You missed out.
I should go back. Maybe they missed something.
Oh no. Oh, now you're gonna have to live with that. Oh my gosh. Well, I'll tell you what though. But you know how doctors are. Doctors are their job is to find something wrong. Okay. I mean, that's really what their job is. If you have a symptom, for them to find something wrong. So I always feel like people ask what tests they need, and I'm like, look, if a neurologist looks at you, examines you, and says you don't need those tests, then you don't need those tests. Those tests are for specific clinical scenarios. We're not. It's actually, I really respect doctors who aren't over testing people. So
Okay.
I'm glad you saw the neurologist, but I'm not concerned that you didn't have those tests done. Yeah.
Yeah. So look, neurologist again ruled out the serious stuff, right? So they also did an MRI on my brain just to. The other complication was I also box like casually, and so I have over the years been hit in the head a few times. And so that was one of my other concerns, right? I thought maybe this is some kind of a traumatic brain injury that's now showing up, and I'm going to be, again, health anxiety, doom spiral, right? Am I going to now become a vegetable? All of that. So he ran those tests, and he was basically, your brain is fine, and nothing. I'm not worried about anything. He gave me some. He also gave me some advice around what to do. So apparently, a high dose of vitamin B helps. So I went nuts with vitamin B, B2. So yeah, it was B2 and a few other things.
It's used to, yeah. I think it's CoQ10.
Yes, that's right.
B2, and there's one that magnesium, and there's one more thing they put on this protocol. I'm sorry, I don't remember, because I often tell people not to worry about it. But yeah, and I always feel like with stuff like that, it's reasonable. It's not going to hurt you, so it's not, it's okay to try. But I imagine it didn't fix the problem, did it?
No. And there was that moment of holding my breath where I remember again running to this, it's like the same story on repeat, right? So I leave his office, I run straight to a chemist, I buy myself a packet of, I go to see a pharmacist, I'm like, where's your B2? And so, and I remember her face, she was like, oh, we don't sell much of that these days. And I'm like, well, so anyway, it didn't help. I was already on those other magnesium and CoQ10 from the naturopath. So the neurologist was behind the curveball on that. But and look, again, I don't know whether it actually helped. Maybe it destimulates something below a certain threshold. I mean, I'm laughing at it now because I think that's just how I'm coping with the whole situation, to be honest. But at the time, I was just latching onto anything that would help, and I was willing to try just about anything. Sure. So, so the neurologist was another character. Then I went to see an acupuncturist. Sorry, came earlier. I went to see an acupuncture specialist. Again, same thing. Maybe no clear benefit, but maybe something did register for my system. I don't know, but definitely didn't fix anything. And then also I went to an EMDR specialist, which was interesting. I worked with her for a couple of months, and I did go through a few childhood experiences, which really did. It was. I think that was probably the most valuable part of the whole journey. We obviously went deep, and the experience showed me just how much the early childhood traumas that I've had shaped who I am today. And I've had some severe bullying episodes when I was a kid, and so there was a lot of decisions I made about myself and the world. And basically, she just kind of showed me that I tend to view the whole world as a threat, and
Yeah.
that was useful from that kind of perspective. Where I think that fell short is because I felt that I really needed to work on this medical side of things, right? It became quite apparent to me that my journey was, well, my issues were limited to, not limited, but the epicenter of the issues was this medical event, right? And she was less keen to work on that, and she was more wanting to go back into my childhood all the time and work on the more holistic. Her theory was that if we work on that, we can lower the amount of stress in your body, and the whole thing will come down. So after a few months of that, I stopped because I felt, and also the costs of it were adding up as well. I mean, that's the other loss, right? Because at some point it was the supplement stack, the $200 a week on the EMDR therapist, all of the scans, all of this. So I was just watching the money go out the door, and I was working part-time, and I was thinking, I need to make some decisions here around what to do and how to invest my time and resources, right? And that was part of the reason, again, why I gravitated towards the free stuff, right? Because yoga is free, and so is parasympathetic breathing. So that, again, so some guidance early on, back to the same theme, would have been extremely useful, right? Like, don't waste your time and money on all these tests. Just focus on living life, and here is a skill set that you can develop to deal with fear. That would have been almost enough, right?
Yep. Agreed. Yeah. It's so interesting that, your EMDR therapist was onto something, but it's so interesting to hear you say this, because I had a discussion with my colleagues this morning about this, about how when people are in loops of health anxiety, so you've heard me talk about the stress bucket, how like there are things in the stress bucket. When your stress bucket's full, then you're more likely to develop symptoms because your nervous system's like, I'm full, I'm done. Like, now I'm going to overreact to everything. And so, excuse me, addressing early childhood stuff does help take stuff out of the bucket. The problem is, what I was explaining to my colleagues this morning, I said that my point of view is, if there's a strong health anxiety loop going, you can work on childhood trauma all you want, but until you break the health anxiety and fear loop, people are just going to keep feeling stuck. They're just going to keep whipping themselves up into this frenzy of fear, as you say. So almost like people need immediate tools to work with that first. And then maybe if they're interested, if they need to, if their symptoms haven't resolved, then we start to say, okay, well, what other things might we need to work on? So it's almost like you did that in reverse. You worked on that early stuff first, and then you realize, like, I feel like that might have been useful, but I'm still looping. I'm looping about this medical issue. I'm looping about my health, and this is not stopping that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think my intuition was correct about that. Interestingly, we had a couple of sessions that focused on the health, and an interesting data point that showed up was that when she walked me through that panic attack, when she got me present to it, I remember getting up and feeling symptoms extremely severely, right, afterwards. And I was thinking, interesting. We just pressed the button here. So and then because I felt safe knowing that was what she did. Essentially, I felt safe knowing that they're going to go away, and they did. After the session, I was like, we're clearly circling the wagons here, right? This is what I need to focus on. So look, in the review mirror, each one of those practitioners and my friend did offer something constructive. It's just none of them had the full picture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So what brought you to my YouTube channel? Like, how'd you find it?
I think I might have been researching PPPD and various vestibular remedies. I was probably looking for more vestibular exercises to do, quite frankly. And then somehow through the magic of the algorithm, you popped up. And I think I started with that. I bought the book that you have on Amazon, the
workbook.
The workbook.
That accompanies the free course.
Correct. Yeah, I did that. and and that was good. And I was like, this is something that I again, we're touching onto something that it felt like we were heading in the right direction. And then I kept consuming more content, and I think what I realized I needed at the time was more structure, right? And so, because again, it was you have a lot of advice, and I'm the kind of guy who, I just need to, here's your goal, mate, and here are the steps, right? So just do it like that. And so that's when I found out you also have that course, the community, and
Steady start.
for my brain, that was just perfect. I was like, done, sign up, and just weekly step by step thing, and that was the beginning of the recovery.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. I will tell you, it was like pulling teeth to get me to make that program. And I did it for you because I don't think that way. I'm more of a like, ooh, this idea kind of person a lot of the time. So I am so happy. It just fills my heart so much to hear that that structure was useful to you. Cause I thought, again, that's why I did it because people were asking for something like that. They're like, I just need you to tell me what to do every day and just, I'll do it. Just tell me whatever it is you tell me to do it, I'll do it. But that wasn't my general like mode of thinking. So it's so cool to get to hear that it was helpful to you.
Yeah, I imagine there are different types of people who learn differently, and some people maybe benefit from this more randomized approach. And again, like having seen most of your videos on YouTube, like there's now being able to look at them through this more like an outsider lens. All the stuff that you need to recover is actually there. It's
Yes,
just
it's
that if
free.
you
Yes.
need, yeah, exactly, and it's all free. And so it's just that the structure piece, I think, if somebody's brain works in that kind of way where they just need to be locked into a particular pathway, then that's invaluable as well.
Yeah. So do you want to describe what your routine was like or what was most helpful for you kind of once you found it and it clicked and you started up implementing, what did your days end up looking like? So when you weren't taking long walks on the beach and parasympathetic breathing and single nostril breathing all day, what were you doing?
A lot of somatic tracking at the beginning. So the interesting thing is that at the beginning, when I came across you, I was still, in my mind, how it occurred was, so there are two buckets that I need to work on. One is the parasympathetic. I was not prepared to let go of the parasympathetic stuff yet. I was like, right. And so, but then, come on, that's safety, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Safety first. So, and so then I began to implement the stuff that you teach. So all the somatic walking, and then the fear. Interesting. The fear exercise, for example, which is really early on. That was huge. I didn't actually understand the full power of it until much later, because I remember going through it and thinking, okay, maybe it just didn't. I didn't quite understand I got the watching the fear, like being okay with the fear. I didn't understand the being okay with the reactions to the fear, like the meta, right?
The meta fear. Yep,
Yeah,
yep,
right.
yep.
And so it just kind of went over my head. And so I basically just went through the whole course systematically. I fell behind for some time because again, parasympathetic is number one, right? So so I think in about week 3, I kind of fell back, and then I caught up with it. And there were a couple of times when I also almost threw out the whole baby with the bathwater. I mean, this was not a linear journey. Again, this is what you teach, right? 100% correct. There were definitely times where I felt I was getting better and celebrating it with my wife, and then there were times where I was just over it. It was just like, none of this is working. This is all nonsense. I signed up to some course,
Yep.
you know,
Some weird
some
lady
some
in the
internet lady.
US.
Yeah.
Yeah, an internet lady. That's me. Yep. 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 Yep.
And so it was just, yeah, it was a mishmash of different things. What else was there? Yeah, so there were times where I would just stop doing everything as well because I felt fed up with all of it, and I was just like, I'm going to go back to my usual life, like literally just stop the parasympathetic, stop your course, and just tried to just live life, right? And ironically enough, I went through a few cycles of that, and the funny thing is that the huge pivotal point that did occur was during one of those times. One thing I did notice is that the best times, and this is perhaps what the one key takeaway that I'm hoping to pass on to anyone who's watching and listening, is that in my experience, the darkest moments were always followed by the biggest breakthroughs, consistently, right? It was really weird. It was like and I think maybe even the mechanism is built into the process, right? Because the most recent time when I got so fed up with it, I remember finishing work. Screens were always, again, this lights, all the rest of it were an issue, and I just remember going, you know, like I don't want to swear on your video, but like it was literally like one of those moments where I was just mad. I was just like so livid. I was like, instead of mollycoddling myself and babying myself, I'm just going to go for a run. And again, I'm a very sporty person, but throughout this year, I did nothing but walks, right? I never stopped moving, but I did not push myself because, again, fear of overstressing my body.
Overstimulating yourself.
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I did some weights, but really light weights, all the rest of it. And I was just really craving for that kind of workout that makes you feel almost sick, right? That where you come home and you're just like, you just can't move.
Yep.
And I was like, I'm going to do that. So I went for a run and I just punished myself. I started off with a light run, and then on the way home, I just sprinted basically to the point where I was just almost ready to vomit. And it just like I just didn't care anymore. That's what I was like. If this gets worse, it gets worse. I'm just gonna like live my life. And I was walking home, just recovering from it, and I realized the symptoms are gone, right? And I went to the supermarket, which is usually be a massive problem because lights in supermarkets. And I'm shopping, and I realize I haven't even thought about the symptoms for the first time in like months. And I'm like, I'm actually like shopping instead of trying to shop between like trying to not to wobble.
Right. Surviving.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And I come home and I'm thinking, it's like the clearest I've been in months. And I've had those moments of like hope throughout the months, but there was something about that moment that really felt like it was in my bones. Like I was like, I know I'm good right now, and that period lasted for a whole week, right? I was like, holy man, I think I'm done with this, right? Like I think in that moment when I went for that run, I sent such a strong signal to myself that I'm just gonna do whatever, and I'm okay. That the system really responded.
That's
So,
right. That's right. It's bring it on. It's, you know what?
yeah.
Fear, symptoms, do your worst, bring it on. That's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, and I did that as an exercise a few times. I was like, "Oh, bring it on! I'm not scared of you." But there's always a part of you that's like, "Oh, I am actually scared."
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? But
Yeah.
that was like a really genuine moment of like, it came from a place of like resentment almost, where I'm just like,
Mm-hmm.
just this is it, right? So that lasted for a week, and then of course I got into my brain again because I remember walking around on like on day 5 and thinking, "Holy man, what if this comes back?" And so then it started out, right? And so I was like, "Of course," and then of course it did come back, and then I'm thinking about it coming back, and it's getting worse. So I'm watching myself getting worse, and then I kind of spiraled down again. So then it took a few more weeks to find the bottom again, and to then actually learn to come back out of it again, and then be okay with it coming back. And again, I went back to your YouTube videos, and the one that you had recently about the OCD, but there was another one that you did recently, or maybe it was the fear exercise that I did again, where I can't remember which one it was, but I remember like watching a few of your videos and them sinking in on a whole new level. And I think that's the other valuable thing. It's like reading a book, right? You can read a book 5 times, and each time you find something new in it. And I think that's very much the truth here, because I think where you're at, you'll find new dimensions of what you teach in it. And that's where I remember the fear exercise really actually hitting home. And something else, I think it's like in week 3 in your course, where I think it's after the fear exercise that I remember actually.
There are a few on doubt. There are some on doubt, on fixing, on.
Oh, well, yeah. It was the fixers. Yeah, that's right. It was the fixers.
The fixers.
And that that question that you ask about, would you ask the fixer to step back, and would it be okay to? I remember just going through that, and for some reason, I just broke down crying. I can't explain why, but it just something in my system just kind of felt heard, and it just came out of me. It was just a really powerful moment where something was touched, and it felt like it needed to be touched. It hasn't been heard before, maybe, I don't know. But yeah, in that moment, I was like, it feels like I'm healing, actually, even though I'm just a total mess. And from there on, it was literally just like a journey up. I was like, once I tasted that sweet victory, it was like, all right, bring it on. And the last thing I'll say about the journey is that, ironically enough, in some ways, that last mile was also the easiest, but also the hardest, because my brain, it recalibrated what an acceptable threshold of symptom is. Right? You've heard that before, I'm
Nailed
sure.
It. Yes.
Because in some ways, actually, having symptoms at some point felt safer. It's like I was like, I know what this is like, and I can kind of live with it. But whenever I had the windows of 0 symptoms, then the fear of them returning was much greater than when I was kind of the other way, right? And so digging myself out of that thing took a bit of time as well. Like I really had to focus on making sure I'm not just focusing on that, being with all my fears, watching the reactions to all those fears, and again building up a toolkit of that to help me with that last mile. Oh, by the way, I still have some sleep issues as well. Like I have weird sensations when I'm sleeping.
Still working on that. Mm-hmm.
So that's the last thing, really, and the same practices are actually helping with that as well. So
it's all part of the same thing.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for describing the process of hitting the bottom like that. People ask about this all the time, because often they'll ask about it when they're there, right at the bottom. And I think this is the first time anyone's really described that in such detail in an interview. I think this is really going to help people understand, because it's just like what you said. I usually say something like, when you have the deeper or the more intense symptoms, it tends to be the time when your tools actually are going to make the most impact. But I like the way that you described it more, that it's almost like it's like, I don't want to say it's a rite of passage, like, oh, it has to happen that way. That's not what I mean, like in a fate way. I just mean there's kind of a breakthrough that happens when you give up at some point, like when you really just are at the point of just complete fine, you're here. Okay. I give in, I accept, you're here. It's like that is actually a moment of like less fear when you respond to the fear by saying, cool, fine, I give in, you win. You're actually not being as afraid of the fear as you were before, and not being as afraid of the symptoms as you were before.
Yeah, it's it was that combined with really getting present to the fact that it's just sensations, right? And I think it takes repetition as well. I think it took me a while to really hear it, because I remember still walking around a month ago going, my classic thing would be like I would work and after the work day, the screen would trigger things, and I'd be walking to the gym and just kind of feeling funny in my hips and my feet. And I'm thinking, what am I afraid of, really? Like, it's just a sensation, like really thinking about it, right? Like it's not really stopping me from living my life. I've already lived through this for the last 10 months, right? Like what is really going on? Well, the thing that's really bugging me is the fact that I'm thinking about it all the time. I'm actually living, I'm here right now, right? And so it took a while to hear that and to really register it on a whole new level. And of course, the irony of it, the weird, the trippy thing about this is it's kind of like a complete paradigm shift, right? Again, going back to the medical system, the usual thing is you have symptoms and this is something wrong with you, and we're going to fix it, and then you're going to believe you're fine. Whereas here, you have to believe you're fine first, and it's almost like magic, right? It sounds like
It
it
does
sounds
sound
like
like
some kind of
magic.
charlatan thing where
It
it's
does.
like believe, achieve, power of now,
I
but it's
totally agree. Yeah, it does sound. That's why I'm so careful on my YouTube channel to be as like concrete as possible in how I
right,
explain things and not use that kind of like
yeah,
cliche like power of belief type stuff because it's just so off-putting to me. And I know it could, if now you can say it and you can see it, right? But if I had started off by saying that, you just have to believe you're fine and, you'll believe and you will achieve or whatever, you would have been like, this is obviously just complete and utter crap. It's internet crap. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
So
exactly.
you alluded earlier to, you said there were a few traps. Are there any other ones that you wanted to share?
Yeah. So the other one was comparing my symptoms to. I was fixated on trying to work out if I'm getting better by trying to compare my symptoms in a specific location to a previous period, right? Because eventually I
Oh,
figured, oh yeah, right,
yes, terrible trap. Terrible trap. Yes, yes, yes.
and yeah. So for example, I figured out that certain lights trigger it. So then, when I would walk into my supermarket downstairs, I would be like, okay, I'm feeling better in these lights now. So therefore, thumbs up, I'm getting better, right? And of course, that's a trap because next time you're not feeling better, you're going to go twice as hard in the other direction. And so I try to gauge how well I'm doing by almost creating this map. I had this whole world map of locations with various complexities of like visual complexities, and I knew how much I should feel, how well I should feel in different environments, right? And then I would compare, and I'd get super upset if, for example, I'd go to a particular location where I felt better before, but now the symptoms are worse there. So I kind of externalized it, right? I thought that the location was the problem, and I should always feel the same or better in a specific location. And I think it was not until I really started to treat this as an internal process where I really almost learned to completely ignore the external environment and just really go, oh, that was one of the later lessons. That's right. In what you do, where just always focus on what's inside, focus on feel like I get like a tightness in my chest, and it's kind of like almost like, oh, you have pets.
We do. We have Benji being very he's like very alarming and scary, and he would scare off any intruder. He's a tiny little.
Oh my God.
Are you scared? Are you scared? Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
he's
All of
barking.
my health anxiety is just returned. But
Yes,
yeah, great.
terrifying dog. Yeah.
Is that a Pekingese?
No, he's a Cavalier Spaniel.
Cavalier
Yeah.
Spaniel. Okay,
Yeah.
I like the stripe, the racing stripe
He's
through the.
I know he's obviously not he's not very useful, but he is sweet. He's very sweet, but not very useful as far as guarding me goes. But
He's emotionally
he's
useful.
he's emotional. Yes, thank you. He's my emotional support dog here behind me at all times, stuck to me
Yes,
like glue. Would be touching me at all times if he were able to. So yeah, yeah.
he's seeking your attention right now. I think he's
No, I think he's
jealous.
trying to protect me from wind or squirrels or
Okay,
branches or whatever it is he's hearing. I'm going to leave this in, by the way, because people need to see this is just real life. I'm not going to
sure,
edit this
of
part of the
course.
interview out.
No, but
So
anyway, yeah.
you were
Just to
saying
wrap
though,
up the mapping
so
thing.
process goals. So
Yeah, so it
what I'm
was
hearing is you're saying you were making process goals about like how you were reacting internally rather than looking to the environment or to things that were out of your control.
correct. Yeah, and part of it came from necessity, because I was aware that my sleep really began to suffer. I started to wake up throughout the night with these massive jolts, every couple of hours. And so I realized that it's probably not healthy for my system to be constantly on alert and experiencing these things as I'm walking around, and like getting these jolts of like fear. So I thought, okay, I really need to shift my paradigm on this, because the sleep thing really began to bug me after a while. And so that was just the thing that I decided to do. I thought, okay, if I just focus on soothing myself when I'm having this little reaction in my body, and actually focus on that and tell myself it's okay, maybe that will help with the sleep. So again, it was one of those situations where things had to become worse for me to find the right tool to then make that better, and then that made the rest of it better.
Very good. Yeah. Yeah. So can you give just, I don't think I've ever asked this question of someone before, but I think you're equipped to answer it. You're like, oh my gosh, what's she going to ask me now? I'm just wondering if you could share some examples of the kinds of goals you were setting for yourself, because people have a really hard time with this exact trap that you just described. Like, okay, Yonit, how am I supposed to know that I'm getting better if I don't track symptoms every day, or track how I'm how the symptoms are reacting to outside environments? So what were you doing to like really just kind of notice consistently, hey, I'm actually changing how I'm reacting to this, and that's actually getting me better?
What practices I was doing on a daily basis to track that?
Or like what kinds of general goals did you set for yourself? Like when this happens, I'm going to do this. And now I can, give myself a check mark, because that's actually what I'm setting as my goal.
So there were I call this brainwashing, right? I was trying to brainwash myself in many different ways. So one of them was exactly what you teach. It was like basically looking for I wanted to improve my ability to react to the symptoms in a more constructive fashion. It was more like I just changed I changed the scorecard essentially, right? So I was like, what would I give myself out of 10 for this reaction? And I was like, okay, this is a
Fair
fail.
Enough. Yeah.
And so, right. And so it was like that. It was just like, okay, I'm quite proud of myself for how like I just dealt with that. And to be honest, it was very few moments of pride. It was mostly like, okay, this was terrible. And so it was just a constant refocusing on like I wanted to become better equipped at dealing with this, right? That was the game I started to play, rather than minimizing the symptoms. Apart from that, I did all the kind of like variations of the classic stuff. Like, for example, I actually, a version of Bring It On I was playing was like, I want to see how many symptoms I would get during the day. Like I was like, okay, we're gonna maximize the symptoms today. And
nice.
Nice.
That's pretty intense. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, they're not dangerous anyway, right? So they, once I convinced myself that it's just a sensation, I was like, okay, so if I'm focusing on it for 1 second, that's 1 point. If I'm focusing on it 5 seconds, that's 2 points, and then etc. Right? And so I was like, how many points can I get in one day? That was a kind of useful, but it to be honest, it had limited utility, because it's again kind of I think it was just one of the stepping stones, because I found that the lying to yourself is kind of limited as well, because
I
know
say that a lot.
Yeah, I know what I'm doing, right? I'm just basically brainwashing myself, and I don't think it's just a healthy way to live. But
that's exactly what I say when people are asking me about doubts. Like, you can lie to yourself a little bit, but like if you just feel like your response to doubts is, no, I don't have doubts, I believe. I don't know ultimately that's going to really work out, right?
Yeah, so I think if the thing I would point to, it's actually all those exercises that you talk about that are more meta-esque. So it's not just the actual reaction, but like what are your reactions to, and actually having a relationship with those reactions and the doubts. like how you reframe the doubt as being your ally. Oh, by the way, I just got something else. So
Yes.
I was terrified of, because there's this whole underlying health anxiety picture, right? So, and because I was trying to distress myself, anytime I felt a pang of anxiety or fear, I thought this is a step a massive step backwards, right? So I was afraid of all those feelings, and I think one of the key turning points was when I was like, oh, it's okay to have fear, it's okay to have anxiety, it's okay to be terrified. I can still feel safe while I'm having a mad reaction, right? Because that's usually how I operate, right? Like I have stresses at work all the time. There's always issues, but it's not the thing; it's the context around the thing, right? And I think once that sunk in, that was something I really focused on whenever I had situations, whether that's at work or during the work day, or sometimes I would just get an unexplained anxiety show up. And instead of going, oh shit, I'm having anxiety. Oh, by the way, also I missed that part. There was also medications involved. I was taking some
Oh, yeah.
SSRIs at some point, fun stuff, and also some propanolol, which was supposed to like help with
Did you stay
the.
on any of those things?
No, I stayed on SSRIs for about a month, and I weaned off straight away. It just wasn't working for me.
Yeah.
And propanolol I did take for a little while just to help with anxieties.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it fed into the same cycle that we just discussed. It was
Mm-hmm.
the key was to be not afraid of anxiety, but rather than just reducing anxiety.
Yeah.
So yeah, that if there's one big takeaway from this, it's that whole, it's everything is fine. Everything that I'm experiencing is fine, and I need to accept all of it, and I be with all of it, and that is the key part.
You just described it. I mean, there it is in a nutshell. It's we get caught, of course, in the details of all that because that
Yeah.
is what it is. But there are different ways to approach that. But that you're 100% right. So I think you already shared a ton of amazing advice for people. But do you have any final words of advice or encouragement for people who are going through it right now?
Yeah, two things. One is I think the instrumental thing was having a notebook. When I started your course, instead of just consuming the video, I started writing down the little nuggets of gold, and I would go through them. Whenever I would start watching the next video, I'd make sure I went through the old stuff as well, just to internalize it. I think it's much better than just consuming a lot of content, because I just forget it, and it just becomes this, into one ear, out the other.
Mm-hmm.
So that helped me translate a device into practices, right? And even
Very
despite
good.
that, like I mentioned, I missed a lot of it. And it was actually my wife who's like encouraged me recently, like a few weeks ago, to go over the first week, and she's like, "Do you remember this? The B minus thing?" I was like, "Oh yeah," and so and yeah, that's key. And it's easy to overlook because the temptation is just to consume the content and go through it, but it's really slowing down and turning it into practices that really makes the difference. Like, do less but better, right? That's key.
Totally.
And
We have
yes, sir.
a term for this. Don't be a knowledge hamster. Like,
Okay, yeah,
running on a hamster wheel of knowledge. Like, you got to get off the wheel at some point, stop consuming new information and figure out what you need to put into practice. So, to your point.
yeah, yeah. And look, and the other thing is a personal one. It's really the value of having the right people around you. My wife was instrumental in this. In some ways, it's again, this whole experience is a bit bittersweet, because my she was like I cannot imagine going through this on my own. At the lowest point, it was her that kind of helped me keep my shit together. It was the empathy, it was just the being there, it was the knowing that somebody gets you. I think also partly being a male, I have male friends who knew about this, and not many of them, actually none of them, were very useful on this journey. Sorry, guys, but it's like, as guys, I think we go, you'll be right, mate. Harden up, that kind of thing. Oh, have you still got the symptoms? Yep. Like a pat on the back, sort of, let's go and get a beer, that kind of thing, right? That's how we deal with issues. But what really makes a difference on this is none of that. It's actually just somebody sharing the journey with you and making you not feel alone on it.
Yeah.
Especially when you have no answers, especially when you have the doctors are useless and you feel alone, and you don't know where it's going. You don't know where the bottom of this is, and all of your fears are at the maximum. All of which are the end point of all of it, which is like, I'm going to be this debilitated, lonely invalid, right? That's what the brain is thinking. And so having this person in your life who can be there with you is the incredible part. So I don't think I'd be here right now if it wasn't for her.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. And I just want to speak to that for a moment and say, I have an interview coming up with someone who did not have family support and wants to share the interview specifically to share you can still do it even if you don't have family support, because so many people in these conversations say, seriously, I could not have done this without my family. So just for those of you out there who are hearing this and are like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to get better because I don't have a supportive partner, it's okay. But you should not have to do this alone, and that may be where online communities come in. And you know it doesn't have to be one that you have to pay for. It could be if you have a local support group for other things, or just a place of worship or whatever. It doesn't need to be specific to neural circuit dizziness, but it is, you really do need people who are going to be able to respond to you in the way that you need to help you feel safer in this experience. So very much hear you on that, Stephen. And I'm so glad that you had her to help support you.
I
Huge
think
deal.
one way to get that support is to actually have a conversation with your friends. I had one of those conversations with only one of my friends, because I don't think it's an indictment of specific people. It's just I don't think we're equipped as a society really to deal with health problems. We're good at helping people with finances or maybe career
Mm-hmm.
tips or something like that. But health is this weird thing that, especially when you're relatively young, you go through your younger years not dealing with stuff, and then things begin to show up. So people just don't have the skill set. And I remember being quite disappointed in one of my friends, and thinking, how should I deal with this, right? And I decided to have a conversation with him. And the interesting thing is, it's actually brought us closer together. I basically said to him, look, I was hoping for more, and here's how that could have looked, right? And
Wow.
and
Nice.
yeah. But the interesting thing was his response. He kind of thought about it, and he was like, "Okay, tell me more." He was like, because in that moment, it could have gone one of two ways, right? It could have been like, go stuff yourself, and he really thought about it, and he sent me a message saying, "Hey, listen, I'm sorry. It's actually a weakness of mine that my wife tells me about, and I really need to work on this for your sake, but also for my wife's sake." So that, it's interesting. He really took it on, and then we had a chat about how, like, it actually deepened our friendship, because he told me about how his inability to kind of connect on that level with his partner also keeps them at a distance. And so since then, their relationship has improved, and him and I are able to talk better about those things. So I think it's something that, if you are struggling with this with your friends, I would look at it through that lens. It's just more like it's an opportunity to deepen, to have the hard conversation, and the other person and you can also benefit from it.
Very well said. And it does require you to figure out what you need from the other person, like realistically, like what actually, how do you actually genuinely need them to respond. And that's not always easy, especially for those of you out there who, first of all, have spent a long time dealing with a lot of fear over symptoms, but also many of you out there, maybe this isn't the case for you, Stephen, but for a lot of people, part of the issue is they've always been so independent and didn't need other people, so they don't have a lot of practice doing this. So I think it's good practice for them, and as you said, it's good for the people that you're talking to about this as well. So view it as a service to them, not just something for you.
Yeah,
An
correct.
excellent frame on that. Well, this was an awesome conversation. I think you gave some really concrete ideas for people to work on, and it was an absolute delight to speak to you and to get to see you in person. And yeah, thank you so much for being willing to come on and chat with me about this. Not everyone's willing to do video interviews, so this means a lot to me, and it'll mean a lot to the people who see it.
No, thank you. I said this at the beginning, but let me reiterate. I'm hugely indebted to you and for providing this clarity and structure at exactly the time when I needed it most. I think your work is invaluable, and as I'm sure you know, also there's a much wider picture to this, right? There's a much bigger central nervous cluster picture that where people are struggling with chemical sensitivities, chronic pains,
Yes,
all kinds of gut
hyperacusis.
issues, all of that, tinnitus, correct?
Yeah.
And so when you really begin to see how it all ties back into what you teach, it really shows that there are a lot of people living in pain and with not the right lifestyle because they don't have the answers, and the medical system is just not equipped. It's funny. I grew up thinking, the doctors these days have all the answers, right? Like if something's wrong, it's like getting your car fixed. It's like this thing, fix it.
Right.
But it's not like that at all. It's just it's a complete shock to me that how backwards this still is, and the fact that you have to fill in these gaps by having YouTube videos. I mean, it's amazing that you have this reach, and we live in a world where you can publish on things online and you have this distribution.
People can find it.
But this is just mind-boggling that this is not actually part of the medical. I keep coming back to this. I really hope that you can. I really hope that you can keep doing what you're doing, and I want you to know that it's making a huge difference.
Thank you for saying that. And I will say I share your irritation, is a mild word. But I always feel like when people thank me, it's kind of like, I am so sorry you had to go on YouTube to get answers to this thing. Like that,
Right?
that's just like that it makes me feel like that. I mean, I'm so like you said, it's a miracle that I can. It's just a miracle, and I'm so happy, and I'm like, I feel so grateful. It's so meaningful to me. And I meet people like you, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like it means something what I'm doing. It's so great. But I also can't help, just like you said, I can't help but think like this poor man had to go on YouTube to like find answers to something like that was shouldn't have been a thing. It shouldn't be that way. So I take to heart everything that you say, and thank you for the privilege of helping you, and you're welcome. And also, I'm going to do my best to make it so in the future people don't have to get my help. I really, really, you and everyone else who's watching, go tell your doctors. Just go share this information. Some won't be open to it, but some will, and you will help someone else by doing that.
Yeah, in some ways, your ultimate mission really is to make yourself obsolete, right? Like your mission is complete when your advice is so commoditized that it's almost like wearing sunscreen, right? Like you would not make
That's right.
A course for how to avoid sunburn, right? It's just
right, correct.
like it's not a useful advice because it's so well known. So that's exactly what you. That's I think the North Star for you. So
You're
I
100%.
hope you get there.
I'm perfectly. I've already told people I will find something else to do. No problem. I will make soup, or I will become an amateur baker, or something. I will find something else to do with my time. I promise. But in the meantime, I'm in it, and I'll continue to make videos as long as people need them. So
cool. And you have to come to Australia. Yeah. I'll show you around.
I know. I've already been I've already been strong armed into it, and you're not the first person either. So it'll be like a grand tour of Australia, which apparently is big. See, we Americans just don't have a concept of like Australia being a large place. It's a large
Yes.
country. It's not like, oh, like let's, just drive a few hours and you're from, no, it's like a big country. So I'm going to have to do like a grand multiple week tour from east to west coast. I mean, it's going to be epic one day. I will.
There's nothing on the West Coast. That's you. Don't worry about it.
I have some clients who may disagree.
I just this is the
I hear
East.
people in Perth going, how could he? How could he? Yeah.
It's basically just Sydney and then the woods. So you just have to come to Sydney. I know I've just alienated like the 95% of Australia.
Fortunately, you've already given them the good advice they needed, so they can shut it off now and go express your anger, guys. Don't use this as an opportunity to express your anger via journaling. But one day, and I'll look forward to it. I can't wait.
Cool. All right.
Well,
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephen. And thanks to all of you for tuning in, for listening. As always, we look forward to your questions and comments. Let us know if you like hearing success stories. I love to hear it. People who do the success stories like to hear it. And this also lets the YouTube people know that my videos are interesting and other people should see them. So it helps expand my reach when you do that. Also, please like, share, subscribe to my channel, or follow the podcast. Again, all these things help me reach more people. And so again, thank you all of you for tuning in. Thank you, Stephen, for being here. And we'll see you soon. Bye, everyone.